Hello and welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. We're here for another jam-packed, action-filled information overload as we head into the Christmas season. Yes, there's only 4 shopping days left until Christmas. And if you are a guy, if you're a fellow male like I am, I expect that you're probably going to be dashing out to the stores in 4 more days. That's just the way we are. We just accept that. And in the meantime, we're going to focus a little bit today on faith. I mean, we are in the Christmas season. We're not going to do the entire show on faith. We're not going to do the entire show on Christmas. But we are going to ask a question about what is a greater leap of faith, God or the multiverse? That's actually today's Prager University segment.
How did we get here? I mean, literally, not just you and me, but the whole shebang. How is any kind of life possible? The universe is a hostile place. Solar flares, cosmic rays, asteroids flying about. The odds against our existence are truly astronomical. Take it from me. I'm an astrophysicist. My job is to look out into space at stars and galaxies, trying to answer these basic, how did the universe come to be questions? Well, those who have a religious faith have an answer: God. The Earth's distance from the sun, the size of the atom, and 1,000 other things large and small that allow us to live and to breathe and to think all seem perfectly tuned for our existence. To many, this design suggests a designer. But from a purely scientific point of view, the faithful have a big problem. They can offer no indisputable proof for this belief. Because of the lack of hard evidence, it's probably not surprising that over 70% of the members of the National Academy of Sciences declare themselves to be atheists. But they have a big problem too. Absent a creator, how do they account for the existence of the universe, of planet Earth, of human consciousness? How do they account for the existence of anything? Well, it turns out they have an answer, and it's become all the rage in scientific circles. It's called the multiverse, and according to many scientists, our universe isn't the whole ballgame. Far from it. These scientists argue that there's an awful lot of universes out there, not just 1 or 2, but an infinite number of them. Let me explain. 13.8 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. From something unimaginably small, we don't know exactly what, the universe exploded into existence. How did it happen? Why did it happen? It doesn't matter, because it happened. Immediately after the Big Bang, the universe underwent a rapid expansion. Think of a gush of bubbles exploding from a seriously shaken soda can just after it's popped open. Cosmologists call this the theory of inflation. As the universe inflates and expands, the bubble universes grow and separate to become their own distinct entities, each with their own unique properties. In other words, new universes are spawned, and not just a handful, an infinite number of them. Some of these universes would be too cold for life and some too hot. But with an infinite number, surely one is bound to get it just right. In short, you and I are just an accident that, given enough universes, was inevitable. But wait, there's more. Because there are so many universes, it's very likely, according to the multiverse scenario, that everything that could possibly happen does happen in one universe or another. That girlfriend who broke up with you, you're married to her in another universe. Does this sound a bit far-fetched, a little too science fiction-y? Well, not to Nobel Prize-winning scientists like Steven Weinberg or the famed cosmologist Stephen Hawking, as well as a myriad of others who wholeheartedly endorse it. But here's what's really surprising. They endorse it knowing there's not a single shred of hard scientific evidence that supports it. And how can there be? There's no way we can access another universe. In short, a vast number of the world's most eminent scientists believe in something that hasn't been, and in all likelihood will never be proven. How does that sound to you? Probably the same way it sounds to the distinguished physicist Paul Davies. Invoking an infinity of unseen universes to explain the unusual features of the one we do see is just as made up as invoking an unseen creator. The multiverse theory may be dressed up in scientific language, but in essence, it requires the same leap of faith. Or, as G.K. Chesterton quipped, when men stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. For multiverse believers, this is literally true. The same scientists who reject God's existence due to the lack of evidence pin their hopes on a theory so all-inclusive and vague, it could never be refuted. Those who believe God created the universe are intellectually honest enough to admit that they do so on the basis of faith. But those who believe in the multiverse are also keeping the faith. They just don't admit it. So let me ask you, who's taking the bigger leap? I'm Brian Keating, professor of physics at the University of California, San Diego for Prager University. Thank you.
And that is a very valid question that we all should be asking ourselves as we examine all this stuff on the news about science, and we try to figure out the difference between faith versus reason. Now, I bring up faith versus reason because that actually has been an age-old question. It goes back to the Renaissance period. They were arguing faith versus reason. Go back to the now, of course, now I draw that mind blank on the Reformation. That's the word I was looking for. The argument between Martin Luther and the Catholic Church. Faith versus reason. This is an age-old question of faith versus reason. And in the 21st century, you still have it. It's called God versus science. So the scientists seem to act on faith just as much as theologians do. Something to ponder. The one thing when it comes to evidence, though, there's also the historical record. Now, I'm using the historical record as a transition because last week, or earlier this week, on Monday, I had a chance to see a film that I have been waiting for months. Being a historian, it was really a treat for me to watch They Shall Not Grow Old, produced and directed by Peter Jackson from Lord of the Rings fame. We're going to show you that trailer right now, and then we're actually going to follow up with more about the process behind the film.
Before I start, I do have to thank you personally for something, because when I was in 6th grade, I saw Dead Alive for the first time, and I want to thank you for the lawnmower scene. I just want to say thank you.
Were you actually legally able to see it?
Not at all.
No.
But that lawnmower scene is
right,
incredible.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like,
you know, it's a good use of a lawnmower. God knows I don't. We shouldn't have to cut the grass, but at least we do know if the zombie apocalypse happens, don't throw your lawnmower away.
yeah.
It may come in handy.
Peter Jackson says that. You know, I am curious about this, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
When the movie starts, we have the aspect ratio of the little box with the black and white footage, and then as we expand out, it's so cool to watch.
Okay, well, that wasn't the trailer. That was actually one of the interview clips that we wanted to show you in a little while. So we're going to look now at the trailer, They Shall Not Grow Old, new trailer. And this is what the film is about before we really get into what Peter Jackson has to say. If my producer can find it.
I was 16 years old and my father allowed me to go.
I was just turned 17 at the time.
I was 16.
I was 15 years.
When they came to us, they were frightened children and had to be made into soldiers.
Boys, here it comes. We're in the pictures.
I gave every part of my youth to do a job.
was a job to be done, and you just got on and did it.
Now, when I watched this film, I was completely blown away. Literally, it's a World War I film, I was blown away. Now, I did watch the 3D version, and when it comes back out again, I will be watching the 2D version just because I want to see the difference. But I'll tell you this, when you can study a time period like World War I, and you look at the black and white images, the black and white film, there's just something that doesn't quite grab you. And I'll tell you this, being a combat veteran of Iraq, I didn't view the Iraq War in black and white. I viewed it in full color. You know, all the desert sand, the tans, the coloring of the netting on equipment, you know, the gray of the C-17s and C-130s. That's what I saw. I didn't see black and white. Neither did the World War I generation. So to be able to take the old footage and colorize it and clean it up and make it presentable made the actual World War I veterans real. Now, I did meet one World War I veteran when I was a child. We had one guy left in the early 70s. I can't even remember his name right now. And there was a time, I met him when I was in kindergarten. And then by the time I was in second or third grade, I was walking down the street in my small town from a friend's house, and I had a chance to meet him again, and we ended up sitting there talking, and he was telling me about some of his experiences in terms of an elementary school student could understand for the next 2 to 3 hours. I had that opportunity to visit with a World War I veteran. Only one I ever got a chance to meet. And they're all gone now. There may be 1 or 2 World War I veterans still left in some part of the world, but it's highly doubtful since we're now past the 100th anniversary of the armistice. These guys would have to be 115 to 121 years old in order to actually be able to talk about World War, the wartime experiences. So the last of the World War I generation passed away a few years ago. There is not going to be another. So to have a film that brings these guys back to life with the original footage was a big treat. And we're going to now have a section, a clip about the process of coloring the footage that Peter Jackson had used. So let's take a look at that right now.
Now, a century ago, there were barely any film cameras, certainly none that recorded those long ago times in colour or with sound. The few bits of film of the First World War are in black and white, scratchy, grainy and silent, as you will no doubt have seen. So with the 100th anniversary of the end of the war coming up, the film director Sir Peter Jackson, of Lord of the Rings fame, has decided to do something about it. His latest production has brought back to life in a really quite remarkable way those who offered theirs for King and Country.
It is the way the war would have been seen and heard 100 years ago. Not in monochrome, but in colour and with sound. Faces crystal clear, life on the front made immediate. The experiences of an infantryman in the Great War are shown in breathtaking detail. Old and damaged film has been immaculately restored, no longer juddery, but slowed down to a normal speed.
You didn't care how the war was going, whether you were winning, you weren't bothered with that at all.
Colour has been painstakingly added, and commentary from veterans recorded decades ago tell the story.
All they were concerned with was that we were fit to fight.
As the creator of fantasy film epics The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Oscar-winning film director Peter Jackson had all the latest technical know-how at his disposal.
I was really intrigued by if we threw all this computer firepower at essentially the job of restoring old film, where we could actually go with it. I've seen restored film and it's okay, but I just thought let's go to the utmost degree with all the technology we have. And see how far we can go with it. And I was blown away by how far, by what it actually the results. I mean, it took me hugely by surprise.
The original footage on film is held by the Imperial War Museum. Existing uniforms from the age helped in matching the colours during the restoration, with lip readers used to work out what the soldiers were saying.
The soldiers you see in the film were often talking to the camera and trying to address relatives or friends back home where the film would have been screened in the cinemas. That's why you often see smiling, shouting, waving.
Peter Jackson's grandfather and great-uncles fought in the war. For him, restoring the footage was a labour of love, a way to focus on the individuals who laughed, lived and too often died together.
We're trying to make a film that is about the human experience of the war, and with all this, all the voiceover being from all the veterans. So black and white just wouldn't, they didn't see it in black and white. So therefore, I mean, it's got to be colour. There was no choice in the matter. So every reel of film that we restore, I'm just amazed and stunned, and feel sort of privileged at seeing it.
The film will be screened at cinemas next Tuesday and then sent to every secondary school in the UK. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
That looks absolutely amazing, does it not? I will definitely be watching that. Now, finally...
Before I start, I do have to thank
now,
you personally
this,
for
of
something,
course, is a
when I was
British
in
production.
6th grade, I
so
saw
it
Dead Alive
focuses
for
on
the
the
first
British
time,
Army.
and I want to thank.
They did go back. Well, and I think Peter Jackson's going to talk about this. I think in the next clip. I watched a lot of stuff this last week, so I can't exactly remember where he discusses everything. But what he did in that film was went back into the archives for oral histories from like the 1960s and 1970s, back when these guys were not old to the point of, forgetting their experiences, where dementia or Alzheimer's takes over. So they're not like our current age of the World War II generation. At the same time, they were well enough past their experiences to be able to talk about it. So it wasn't, audio recordings from the 1930s, but it was like from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so you're hearing the narration of the entire film by people who served in World War I. And then to see the colorization, it was just mind-blowing. It was extremely impressive. And there's only 2 U.S. nights of performance. This past Monday was the first one, and it had grossed $2.3 million at the box office. It is screened in, I think, 1,132 theaters, which is very impressive haul for a one-day documentary. And so if you missed it in the theaters on the 17th, and this is the reason why we're talking about it today, I encourage everybody to go and see this film. And the film will show one more time in the theaters in the United States, and that will be coming up on December 27th. So you need to go and find a theater near you. You can go and look on Fandango. You got it listed there. You should be able to just do a quick search and find your theater to see this performance. I'm sure it'll be coming out on DVD, but I'll tell you this, you miss something about that experience if you don't watch it on the big screen. And I rarely ever say that about any type of film. So this one, I can't express to you enough how much you will have a deeper appreciation for World War I, which happened 100 years ago, by watching this film. So now we're going to show you the longer interview with Peter Jackson as he discusses the filmmaking process in putting this together.
Before I start, I do have to thank you personally for something, because when I was in 6th grade, I saw Dead Alive for the first time, and I want to thank you for the lawnmower scene. I just want to say thank you.
Were you actually legally able to see it?
Not at all.
No.
But that lawnmower scene is incredible.
Yeah. It's a good use of a lawnmower. God knows I don't. We shouldn't have to cut the grass, but at least we do know if the zombie apocalypse happens, Don't throw your lawnmower away.
Yeah.
It may come in handy.
Peter Jackson says that. You know, I am curious about this, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
When the movie starts, we have the aspect ratio of the little box with the black and white footage, and then as we expand out, it's so cool to watch. Do you actually have to fill in more of the frame in order to get the shot to expand to a wide
it's
screen?
the opposite. We have to chop stuff of the bottom and the top. But fortunately, in the First World War, the cameraman used to generally shoot quite wide shots. So a lot of the top and bottom is just sky and ground. So that's what we clip off the top and bottom, and but you still get so from the left to the right is the actual image. Yeah.
So cool. Now, one thing I love about this is the frame rates. I was reading that back then they would shoot with like 13 frames per second, and you had to somehow get this to 24.
Well, they were shot all over the place. I mean, I was led to believe all my entire life, I thought that silent movie film, which was the cameraman, was basically 16 frames a second. And it wasn't 16 frames a second at all. I mean, we had to restore hundreds of hours of footage, and we was 10 frames, 12 frames, 13, 14 frames, 15. I mean, if it's 16, maybe if you're lucky, 17, 18. And so we had to figure out what the frame rate was. And then we had to turn that to 24 frames, which the computer does. So
you make new frames, right?
Well, the computer does it. Yeah, I don't even know how it does it. Please don't ask me, as I can't tell you. But somehow it takes the frame before and the frame after, and it creates a whole new frame that then gives you this feeling of a smooth movement once you're back to 24 again.
Now, there's a great shot in the trailer, which I kind of want to break down from a cinematic filmmaking standpoint. It's the moment where they're all standing there, and the guy says, "Hey, we're going to take a picture." And he looks back at the guys, and they're all there.
Right, the guy that says, "Hey, we go. Here it comes. We're in the pictures."
Yeah. So I want to ask you, looking at that scene. So obviously that was originally a black and white,
silence,
no sound, anything. So walk me through real quick, line by line, the color. How do you color that sequence? Like, what's the first step there?
Well, the color was actually done. We restored the black and white. The color was done by an American company called Stereo D. Fortunately, with a military film like this, you've got a bit of a head start because I've got a big collection of uniforms, and the uniforms we know what those colors were.
Yeah.
I drove around the Somme and Flanders and Belgium just completely alone in a rental car about a year ago for 3 or 4 days, taking photos of the landscapes and the dirt, because I wanted to get the colours of the mud and everything to be accurate to there. So I got a big photo library. Then we have to, but what we're also talking about though is the sound. And your silent movies, you're going to see people talking, and you don't know, And 100 years ago they were saying something, but there was no sound recording. So there are people in the world, I discovered, I didn't know this, who are called forensic lip readers. And I think they do a lot of work for law enforcement if there's a security camera footage with no sound, so the police can see what the people are saying.
Yeah.
And so we handed this silent footage, First World War footage, over to the forensic lip reading people, who came back with saying, "Oh, well, this is what this guy says." And so I mean, I thought, well, I mean, they could make up anything really. Who's going to know? But then we found out we would then find out what the regiment was, what part of the UK they were from, because obviously accents in Britain vary all over the place. And if you don't get the right accent, the lips don't really work. So then we would get actors from that particular part of the United Kingdom, and we'd get them to say these words that we were told, and we'd fit them together. And you know that they are actually that they are accurate because they fit. Wow. They suddenly see the lips moving, the words fit, and you think, wow, this is actually the real thing. This is what they're saying.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, at the end of the film, we obviously see this great photo of your grandfather. And one of the things I love that you've been saying in regards to this movie is you made this movie in the idea of you wanted to learn what his experience was in World War I. Truly, though, as you sit there and watch the finished product, what do you think you fully learned about what your grandfather went through, and why did you want to kind of experience what he went through?
Well, that was the idea of the film to some degree. It became about what the average, soldier in the Western Front experienced. It's not about the generals or the politicians or the kings or emperors or the presidents. It's not about any of those people. It's about the average soldier, and of which my grandfather was a very average working class guy. And so, I mean, I dedicated it to him, but also I should say, I think it's sort of in a way it's dedicated to everybody's grandfather or great-grandfather or great-uncle. It's just, it happens to be, I was the guy making the movie, so I got the privilege of being able to put my own grandfather there, but really it's like this film, I hope, is, if you have some member of your family, or ancestor that was in this war, regardless of whatever country they were fighting for, They still ate the same food. They still were in the same mud, still being shelled by the same high explosives. And so this film will give you a sense of what they went through. Yeah.
One of the things I love about what you did this film is you have the narration is actually done by real audio from real people who were in the war.
Yes, yes.
And I was curious because you're going through hundreds of hours of audio.
Yes, 600 hours.
So my question is really, at what point do you finally shape your narrative?
At the very end.
Okay.
Because you can't go into it. You can't go into it with a plan. Because the plan requires you to have the perfect pictures and the perfect sound to fulfill your plan, and that would be a mistake to do that. And I didn't want to leave some agenda of mine into it. I just wanted to listen to everything. You watch 100 hours of footage and let the soldiers tell their story. That's all I tried to do.
And last question for you. One thing I love about you as a filmmaker is, as technology has progressed, you've really been on the forefront of everything you've done. I mentioned Dead Alive. You look at Frighteners, Lord of the Rings, Meet the Feebles, Bad Taste. I mean, it's so cool about what you've done. I'm curious about the technology and as a filmmaker, like going back to those earlier movies. How have you progressed as a filmmaker with the technology? And do you think you would still make Dead Alive the same way today? Would you make Lord of the Rings the same way you made it then, or what changes?
Well, Dead Alive was pre-computer, so I'm glad I made it then and not now, because it would be, it's not a CGI film.
Yeah.
I mean, this technology is like, it allows you to be a magician and to, put things on screen that no one knows, no one's ever experienced or seen before. I mean, what I like about this movie is we're using technology to bring 100-year-old footage to life. So when there was a cameraman on the Western Front with a big camera on a tripod, big heavy thing, and he was under shell fire turning, he would have had no idea that 100 years later, all these computers were going to try to make that film footage that we were shooting at that exact moment, try to make it look sharp and clear and everything else. So I do love the notion that we are, unlike the Lord of the Rings films or anything else where we're using technology to make a piece of entertainment for modern audiences, we're using it to help enhance this guy's film that he was shooting under very dangerous conditions 100 years ago, and I love that. It's a different way to use it, different way for technology. And I'm hoping, what I do hope is that every film archive in the world, and I'm not just First World War, but there's all sorts of wonderfully historical film footage that's just shaky, blurry, black and white, grainy, scratchy. I hope that film archives of the world take note, and there's no reason why other people couldn't do what we're doing, and we could suddenly we could take some time now to actually get all this historical stuff looking really good for the future. I think that's a very good thing to do.
Well, thank you for everything you've done for film. Thank you for doing this, because you.
So I can't speak highly enough of what Peter Jackson has been able to put together with this. It's just defied any expectations I had for it before I saw the trailer. And I had heard, They Shall Not Grow Old, a World War I film, and I was thinking it's going to be Hollywoodized. It's going to be, Lord of the Rings meets Kilroy. Kilroy was here as a World War I story. That's what I thought. I did not think this was going to actually be a recreation using historical footage. I am extremely impressed. And it was when I actually saw the trailer that we played earlier that it really opened my eyes to say, hey, wait a minute, there's something here to this. And the whole idea of film restoration, at least with me, is not a new concept. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. But if you've been watching this show for any great length of time, you know that I've put together videos for the NASA Cinespace contest. I use a lot of the historical footage that NASA has provided from the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo projects, up to even sometimes the space shuttle. Sometimes on North Star Oasis, we've actually shot, we've done some shows where we've used some of that footage, courtesy of NASA. Despite what these French companies who claim copyright on YouTube videos of video that they don't have in their collection have to say about it. I bring that up because we are on YouTube, youtube.com/NorthStarOasis, and a lot of times we'll use footage, and even in this show we're going to use some footage in just a little bit. From the National Archives that is actually cleared for release. And then all of a sudden, you'll find some French or Israeli or Egyptian company will come up and make a copyright claim against the video, and you'll actually look at what they claim, and they have absolutely nothing to do with it. And then we have to file a dispute, and then nothing happens. And then we have to recut the entire show if you are actually watching this on YouTube, just to get around the whole copyright claim information when we're actually using stuff that's in the public domain. It gets a little frustrating at times, but the fact is, you know, the National Archives does have, you know, the footage. They've got it for NASA. And I was looking at, a couple of years ago, I was looking at putting together a documentary of my own. I just don't have the budget, don't have the access to the funds right now, so I just kind of put that on hold. Using the old Apollo 11 footage. The 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 is coming up next summer, so 7 months from now, actually 7 months to the day, will mark the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. And I thought it would be really cool if we could go back and look for all of the archival clips and convert them into 4K video and clean them up and, you know, do everything we can to get the cleanest copy available, because it's not just going to benefit filmmakers and you know, documentary filmmakers of today, but it's going to be something to be able to preserve for future generations. So I was looking at doing something similar to what Peter Jackson has done already with NASA footage. And then I see what he has actually accomplished with it, and it's like, hey, technologically we can do this. But again, it comes down to having the budget. And in We Shall Not Grow Old, the beginning and the end is all black and white, and then the middle is colored. And why did he do that? Because of the budget. The budget dictates everything when it comes to film, it seems. And especially when you're dealing with sophisticated equipment, it dictates a lot. But I do think that what Peter Jackson has done, those techniques can be applied to NASA video, but it can also be applied to old World War I and World War II video. And I really hope that somebody's able to really spearhead this effort and get that ball rolling. And I know what you're saying. Well, why don't you do it? I would love to. And if you have enough seed money to get me started, just let me know, okay? Because, again, budget dictates everything. So that being said, well, let's go ahead and just show you the next clip here. This is some screen captures that I had done off of World War I footage from the National Archives. And I'm just going to just discuss briefly while you're watching the scene. This is actual World War I battle footage that you're watching here. Most of the footage that we see from World War I was shot by videographers for the U.S. Army Signal Corps. By the end of the war, they had 92 officers and 498 enlisted men, all with cameras, who have gone out to photograph different units and different sections of the battlefield and different parts of the war. You know, they were really early documentary filmmakers. And here, you know, here we have an aviation unit going up, and these are planes that flew combat sorties in World War I. And 100 years later, we can sit back and say, even though the equipment, the planes are substandard technology compared to what we have today, that was still cutting edge stuff. And, you know, to see, you know, all these aircraft going overhead, you know, by 1917, we only had aircraft available as a technology for 14 years. 14 years since the Wright brothers. And, you know, here's a German plane getting shot out of the sky. And somebody had captured that on video. And so when I read a book on the Lafayette Escadrille and I'm reading about, you know, tumbling, you know, to the earth, well, that's what it looks like. There are 360,000 reels of film in the National Archives Record Group 111. And almost immediately after the war, all of the footage was taken back to the United States and cataloged. So we're actually very, very lucky that somebody had the foresight back then to put all of this into the archives. and it's at College Park, Maryland. Then in the 1960s, 1964 and 1965, CBS came out with a 26-part television show. It was a 30-minute show titled World War I. And it was narrated by Robert Ryan to commemorate the 50th anniversary of World War I. In April 9th, 1965, they transferred 747 1,000-foot reels of 35mm footage to the National Archives, and most of that is in the public domain. And so what they've been able to do with getting the access, and with CBS, I have to also say, CBS did one other important thing, and that was they raided the archives of anybody, of other countries. They went in and got a lot of the archival footage to tell the story of World War I 50 years after the Great War. And that's the stuff that the National Archives still has. And then they've digitized a lot of it. And
even those,
I think 85% of that collection is preserved, if I recall correctly. So we're very, very, very fortunate that we had some people with some foresight. Unfortunately, when it comes to NASA and the Apollo missions, we didn't exactly have that because there were some people who, well, let's just put it this way, the footage there has been kind of sliced and diced, and some of the original stuff has been thrown away, and then they ended up making a documentary on some of the missions, but then other archival stuff that could have supported has gotten lost or thrown away, and unfortunately we didn't have the same level of foresight on the historical nature of protecting that footage like you had with World War I and to a certain extent World War II. So we are extremely lucky that we've got this footage. Now, knowing now what you've heard from Peter Jackson about the use of the footage, and you can kind of see some of that with the grainy, herky-jerkiness. I mean, there's one guy who was running in this film sequence, guy running through the fields. He was going a little fast, don't you think? Of course, he mentions the hand crank is the speed in which the camera's going. Well, that makes sense now. And I didn't know that prior to the last couple of weeks. So I would love to be able to see somebody dig in and do something on the Lafayette Escadrille. Lafayette Escadrille, for those who don't know, I guess I'm kind of wanting to tell you this anyway. Last week we covered the Yellow Vest protest in France. So it wasn't the first time we came to France's assistance. Came to them in World War II, came to them in World War I. After World War I was declared, we had people in the United States who wanted to go and help. They went on their own to France. Some went to England. And they volunteered for those countries' service. And one of the reasons they went, a lot of them went to France first, was because of the French Foreign Legion. The French government allowed foreigners, non-French people, to come in and serve in their military in a specialized unit. It was easier to get into the French Foreign Legion than it was to, say, get into the British Flying Corps. So we had people who went over to France and signed up for the French Foreign Legion. We also had an American ambulance company over there, 1915. Technically, the United States government wasn't in the war yet. And you had a bunch of guys who wanted to fly airplanes, and they became known as the Lafayette Flying Corps. And before the Lafayette Flying Corps, we actually had one squadron that was created of specifically American aviators flying for the French government. It was originally called the American Escadrille. Now, the word escadrille is French for squadron. We have squadrons today in the United States Air Force, and it goes back to the French word escadrille. And so they created the American Escadrille. Then the government of Germany complained because America hadn't officially taken sides in the war, and so that was a violation of neutrality. So then the Escadrille changed the name to the Lafayette Escadrille in memory of Pierre Lafayette, who assisted the United States at the American Revolution. And so it became known as the Lafayette Escadrille, and then any American pilot who served in a French squadron, not necessarily the American squadron, became known as the French Flying Corps. Two distinctive members of the the Lafayette Flying Corps. Two distinctive members of the Lafayette Flying Corps, not the escadrille, but the Flying Corps, were Ernest Wald and Cyrus Chamberlain. And both of these pilots were from Minnesota, and they both lost their lives in World War I. And if you go out to the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, it was originally named Wald Chamberlain Field as early as 1923 after these two pilots for the Lafayette Flying Corps who lost their lives in World War I. So we've got a lot of things that we could be doing with this footage and properly preserving it, colorizing it, and interpreting the war, the American involvement in World War I in terms that everybody should be able to understand. And I hope that we can see more projects like what Peter Jackson has done with his epic documentary, We Shall Not Grow Old. Now, I am going to turn the page just a little bit here because it's Christmas time. And we go back to faith versus reason. We're going to go a little bit here on the faith because on Christmas Eve, 2018 marks the 200th anniversary of Silent Night. So we're going to show you the story of Silent Night right now.
Even though Silent Night is one of the most popular songs in history, the fact that we know it at all is a miracle. Created out of necessity and performed in a tiny village on a solitary Christmas Eve by two ordinary Austrians in a tiny choir, this incredibly beautiful and simple carol owes its debt to an organ that wouldn't play and a priest who wouldn't hold Mass without special music. In 1818, 25-year-old Joseph Mohr was the assistant priest at St. Nicholas Church in Oberndorf, Austria. During an extremely cold winter, Mohr was making last-minute preparations for a special Christmas Eve Mass, a service he'd been planning for months. And as he cleaned and readied the sanctuary, the priest encountered an unfathomable dilemma. St. Nicholas's organ would not play. A frantic Mohr struggled with the old instrument for hours, making adjustments, fiddling with the keys, stops, pedals, even crawling behind the console to see if he could find the problem. In spite of his efforts, the organ remained silent, its voice as still as a dark winter's night. Realizing he could do nothing else, the priest paused and prayed for inspiration. He asked God to show him a way to bring music to his congregation on the year's most meaningful day of worship. Mohr would find the answer to his prayer, born from events almost 2 years before St. Nicholas's organ played out. In 1816, Mohr had written a Christmas poem, 6 unadorned stanzas, inspired on a winter's walk from his grandfather's home to the church. It lacked a melody, and he had never shared it with anyone. Mohr dug the poem, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, from his desk and read over the words he had written 2 years before. Up until then, the verses hadn't meant that much to him, but as he saw them again, it was as if the Lord was tossing him a lifeline of hope. He shoved the worn paper into his coat pocket and rushed out into the night. Only hours before the Christmas Eve midnight Mass, the priest fought his way through snow-covered streets. Franz Gruber was a 31-year-old schoolteacher and a modest musician who attended St. Nicholas's Church. And as he struggled to stay warm in his drafty apartment over the schoolhouse, he heard an insistent knock at the door. He must have been surprised to open it and find Father Mohr on the other side. By that time, the priest should have been busy preparing for services, not visiting old friends. After a quick Merry Christmas, Father Mohr pulled the teacher to a small table and explained the problem they faced. After he convinced Franz nothing could be done to fix the organ, Mohr showed him his poem. "Can you write music to these words that can be easily learned by our choir?" Mohr asked. "Without the organ, I guess the song will have to be played on a guitar." The priest looked at the clock, saying, "Please, Franz, the time is so short." Studying the poem, Franz nodded his head. He had a look in his eye and a smile on his face that let the priest know he was up to the challenge. Confident again that God had a special plan for this night, Moore raced back across the snow to the church, leaving Gruber alone with his thoughts, a ticking clock, and a prayer of inspiration. A few hours later, the two friends met at St. Nicholas, and there, in a candlelit sanctuary, Gruber shared his new music with Moore. The priest approved. After learning the guitar chords, rushed it to the choir members, waiting to rehearse. What should have taken weeks was accomplished in hours. In the little time they had, Gruber and Moore taught the choir members the four-part harmonies to the last two lines of each verse. Just after midnight, Moore and Gruber stood in front of the main altar and introduced their simple little song. As they sang, they couldn't have guessed that Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht would be remembered not only the next Christmas in their small village, but almost 200 years later around the world. Despite its popularity, Silent Night remains in most minds what it was written to be, a simple, direct song of praise. Created to make a Christmas service more meaningful, it's as fresh today as it was that night at St. Nicholas's Church. As we hear the words, our thoughts return to another night when the world had seemingly gone dark, when hope had been silenced, when all of humanity's best efforts had come up short, a night when mankind received the greatest gift of all, a baby born to peasants, laid in a simple manger, the Savior of the world, God with us, Jesus.
Now, when I was, I think, in first grade, I mentioned earlier how when I was in kindergarten how I met a World War I veteran. I think it was a year or two later. It might have even been when I was in kindergarten. I mean, we're going back 40-something years now. That we had actually put together our class play, and the story of Silent Night was the class play, and I do not recall, I think I was just in the choir. Just singing Silent Night, singing. I don't think I had any speaking lines. Again, I was really, really young. I do remember Mike Lauren, one of my classmates. He was a grade up from me. He was, I think, the mouse that had wrecked the organ, according to that screenplay, that version of the story. And so ever since then, Silent Night has always been one of those special songs for me. And because I knew the story back when I was very, very young. And as I grew up, I mean, become a historian. I mean, that goes the early part of me recognizing history. But I'll tell you this, now that I look back the last 14 years, I say 14 years because that was probably the most beautiful rendition of Silent Night I've ever heard live. That was when I was in Iraq. Actually 15 years now, because that would have been Christmas of 2013, or of 2003. And I still remember going into the chapel. The chapel was a tan desert tent in the middle of the desert. We went in and for that service, we probably had, I want to say about 125 of us. And getting 125 people in the chapel tent, I mean, it was a packed crowd. And the service was led by Father Pete Lambert. He was a Catholic priest. I was still working when Chaplain Gary Garvey, the Protestant pastor, was giving his service. And the one thing that Father Pete said in his service that has still remained with me is that when you look back to this Christmas, that the Christmas of 2003 is going to be special because we are here. That you will, for the rest of your life, remember where you were in the Christmas of 2003 because that was when you were in Iraq. You may deploy 3, 4, 5 times, but this is the first one that we've had here. And we ended the service with Silent Night with candles. And when you hear, all the service person, my comrades in arms, security forces, your pilots, your JAG officers, your finance people, your services people, everybody all in the same tent, male and female alike, all there with a common purpose. The common purpose was doing our job for what the United States government required us. And there we were, not too far from the tomb of the prophet Daniel. We were in the Holy Land. We were singing Silent Night on Christmas Eve. That was a beautiful scene. It was a beautiful rendition. And I've never, ever forgotten that experience. So it's a special song. It's been a special song since its creation. So on Christmas Eve, when you go to services, and you sing Silent Night, because it will be in that hymnal, take a moment to think back that this song has been around for 200 years, and it's just as special as the day it was written. Now, of course, this is Christmas, and we can't end the show without paying an homage to Santa. And we have actually covered the history of Santa Claus with St. Nicholas and his involvement in the church in Turkey. We've done that already. But now we're going to take a look at Santa Claus from a different perspective, and that is where he is living today. We talk about the North Pole. Where is the North Pole? It's the North Pole. Of course, it's not the Arctic ice sheet, and the North Pole is covered with ice. But is there a place that Santa calls home? There actually is. In Lapland. Now, Lapland, where's that? Lapland is the home of the reindeer. Yes, reindeer do exist. Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, and Rudolph. And, of course, their cousins and their kids and their parents. The huge population of reindeer are found in the Arctic Circle, in Lapland, in Finland. And in the town of Rovaniemi, there's actually a Santa village in the Arctic Circle. And it is dedicated specifically to Santa Claus. So let's take a look at Santa Presents his Welcome to Rovaniemi.
Hello, my dear friends. My name is Joulupukki, but I'm also known as Santa Claus, Babbo Natale, Sinta Lauren, Père Noël, and so on. Let me tell you about my hometown of Rovaniemi. Rovaniemi is situated on the Arctic Circle in Lapland. It is a home for many wonderful and nice people. There are also quite a few reindeer in Rovaniemi. Rovaniemi is a very beautiful town. In winter it's covered with a white curtain of snow. And at night we can see the magical northern lights. Every year many of my friends from all over the world come visit me. In Rovaniemi they feel the true Christmas spirits and like to share it with their family and friends. My helpers from Rovaniemi Tourist Office keep me connected to the rest of the world. They make sure that everybody knows when something special happens in Rovaniemi. And now they have even made me my own stamp. There is always something fun to do in Rovaniemi. Winter or summer, you can make new animal friends. And you will never forget the moment when you see the northern lights with your own eyes. That is real Christmas magic. But what have they got to do with Christmas? There is only one place to find out. My dear friends, it is my great pleasure to invite you to visit Rovaniemi and experience the true magic of Christmas.
There you have it. If you want to experience the true magic of Christmas, you can always take a flight over to Helsinki and then take the trains and the sleighs and the buses up to Rovaniemi, and you will experience the magic of Christmas. And this was not paid for by the Rovaniemi Tourism Bureau, so there's no endorsement explicit or implied, except for I thought it was pretty cute that they've actually got the Tourism Bureau really making that branded for Santa Claus. So with that, we are going to now show you the Christmas departure of Santa Claus from Rovaniemi.
I wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And remember to be good.
So our music went a little bit quicker than we anticipated. So with that, we're just going to take a moment to wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. It's been another incredible, interesting year that we've had here. And we've got one more minute left. And this is pretty much kind of the end of the year. We will have an episode next week that I'm aware of. I may be actually heading out of town, so if you have a rebroadcast next week, it's because of that. But in the meantime, we do plan on broadcasting otherwise. So with that, we are just going to say Merry Christmas, and we want to wish you and your family and your children all the best that this holiday season has to offer. So for Dallas Pearson, our producer, and Jeff Williams, your host, me, for you guys, remember you've got 4 more days to get out and shop. Make sure that you have a special Christmas for your loved ones. And with that, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Merry Christmas, everybody.